Sometimes I sit scrolling through my phone, checking different things across Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Nothing specific, just seeing what's there. Eventually, one of them puts the right thing in front of me, and all of a sudden, I'm hooked. Something grabs my attention and I start chasing it down a rabbit hole. In that moment, time disappears. All of my attention and focus moves there, following whatever is put in front of me next. And then at some point, I look up. The sun has moved. Not just a little either, enough to notice. When I notice that, I'm usually hit with a bit of dissatisfaction in myself. I realize I just spent a chunk of my time giving my full attention to something that really doesn't contribute to the betterment of me. And by the time I notice it, my mind feels fogged, and the energy I needed for the things that actually matter is already gone. What's interesting about that moment is that when I really look at it honestly, I realize something else. I wasn't really thinking during that time. My mind wasn't actively deciding where to go next. It was just being carried along. One thing would grab my attention, then the next, and then the next thing. And my focus would simply follow whatever appeared in front of it. That realization made me start noticing something about the way thoughts work. A lot of the time, they quietly direct us without us realizing it. Not in some dramatic way, but in a very small, subtle way. They pull our attention, steer our focus, and before we even notice what's happening, we're already somewhere else entirely. The strange part is that after spending hours like that, paying close attention to all of those things, I often feel like I have no energy left for the things that actually matter to me. And that used to confuse me, because if I spent an entire day doing almost nothing, just being outside, thinking inwardly, or sitting quietly, I would often end the day with more energy than I started with. Sometimes even to the point where I'd feel restless. Like I needed to go for a hike, or move my body, or do something meaningful with that energy. But when the day was spent feeding my attention into endless streams of information, that energy seemed to disappear. It's almost like we become hooked on cheap stimulation, cheap thrills for the mind. And after a while, the simpler parts of life don't feel as satisfying anymore. So what do? We feed the mind more. More information, more stimulation, more things to pay attention to. Until eventually the mind becomes full of thoughts it never had time to finish. That started to change for me when I began exploring meditation. For a long time, I struggled with it. I tried a lot of different meditation styles. I read about different techniques and the outcomes people talked about experiencing. And in hindsight, that actually became a problem because I had expectations. I thought meditation meant I had to force my mind to become clear. And my mind is very active. So trying to force it to become silent was incredibly frustrating. For a long time, it just felt like I was failing at it. Eventually, something shifted. Instead of trying to control my thoughts, I started letting them run freely, not attaching to them, just letting them run their course. At first, my mind was still very active. Thoughts would come and go, just like they always had. But something new started happening. There began to be space between them. Sometimes that space was short. Sometimes it felt longer. Could be 5 seconds, 5 minutes. I really don't know. Because when that space appeared, time seemed to stop being something I noticed. In that space, the sense of self started to dissolve. Not in a positive or negative way, just disappear. It felt less like being an individual person and more like being something larger than that. Like the physical world and normal sense of time quietly dropped away, if only for a moment. And when thoughts did appear in that space, they felt different, truer somehow. not like they were being generated from the usual place inside my mind. It felt more like tapping into something much larger, something connected, something that words would struggle to describe. Eventually, I would come out of that space, and when I did, everything felt clear. I knew exactly what I wanted to move forward with, and there was no resistance in pursuing it. Thoughts were still there, but they felt aligned with what I actually wanted to do, rather than scattered in every direction. That experience started making me look more closely at my thoughts outside of meditation. And what I noticed first wasn't about other people. It was about myself. I realized that many of the thoughts I carried around were old. They came from earlier points in my life, times that I had already grown past. But I was still holding on to them as if they were solid and current. I also began noticing that many of the ideas and thoughts we share with each other are often built from somewhere else. Sometimes they carry truth. Sometimes they're reinforced by things outside of us. And sometimes they simply come from experiences we had at one point in life that shape the way we think. But over time, I started seeing that those thoughts didn't necessarily belong to the core of who I was. They were built around experiences. And when I stripped them down to their origin, they started to look less like truths about who I am and more like structures my mind had built in response to things that had happened. That realization changed something else for me too. I began understanding that other people's thoughts, words, and actions belonged to them, just like mine belonged to me. I didn't have to feel any particular way about them. I didn't have to try to adjust them or correct them or even engage with them unless I genuinely wanted to. Everyone is living inside their own universe. And the way things are in mine is probably not the way things are in yours. The deeper I looked into all this, the more I started noticing something else. Most of us never give our minds space. There's always something filling it. A phone, music, conversations, videos, notifications. Social media is one of the easiest places to see it, but it's not the only place. There are dozens of ways we fill that space. But the interesting thing is this. You can blame modern life for it if you want, but ultimately, we're the ones choosing to fill those gaps. Turn off your technology for a day. Spend the whole day outside, just walking, thinking, sitting, noticing things. I promise you'll start to have some of the clearest thoughts you've had in a long time. Not because you forced them, but because your mind finally had room to finish what it had already started. Space isn't something we escape to. It isn't some place we run off to when things get overwhelming. Space is something that opens within us when we stop constantly feeding the mind. We've all heard someone say, "I need space." We've probably said it ourselves. But space isn't escaping into another high stimulation outlet. Space is created internally. And the less we feed the mind with constant input, the more space begins to appear. That space allows us to process, to understand, to see ourselves more clearly, to get to know who we actually are beneath all the thoughts built around our experiences. Just like the body needs air to breathe, the mind needs space. And most of us rarely give it any. If we never allow that space to exist, eventually the mind starts to suffocate or drown. Not from lack of information, but from having far too much of it.